Hey, real quick before we start the podcast, if you have listened to more than one episode, can you do me a favor and rate and review the show? Now, I'm not big on asking for favors, but we really want to get this podcast listed in the top of all health and fitness podcasts, not just the fitness category. This will take you less than a minute, and if you could do that, that would make us friends forever. And since we refuse all sponsors on the show, this will be my only ask rather than telling you to go check out some supplement or product we don't actually believe in, like every other podcast out there. So please rate and review. Okay, that's it. To the podcast. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Garage Gym Athlete Podcast. Jerred Moon here with Ashley Hicks. How you doing, Ashley?
Doing great.
Just us today. I feel like when it was just me and Trampus, I had music for us. You and I have a song? I don't remember.
We had the three of us. It's the kind of R&B slower song.
I got too many here. I can't even pull it. Just know everyone play your own soundtrack for a Jerred
90s R&B
podcast. All right. Well, we're going to get into the study today. Then we'll go into a topic talking about CrossFit today. And it's not just haterade, a little bit tiny, small, but ultimately we're just talking about CrossFit in general terms because we were both into CrossFit at one point. And I want to talk about that a little bit more between the two of us. We're going to go over the workout, the Meet Yourself Saturday, super complicated one. So make sure you stick around for the brief. And then we will get into the updates, just what we have going on in our lives. So we're going back to long form podcasts. If you've been listening, we experimented with these short truncated episodes over the last 2 weeks. And to be honest, there was no good feedback, negative feedback, or anything else. So whatever you like or don't like, you guys let us know. But we're going to go back to long form. I think it's better for audio listeners, not having to go through a bunch of different episodes. But it was an experiment. Just know we're always trying new things. And we have a lot of new things we're going to try in 2023. But as we round out this year, one update, we do have Better Human Friday coming up at the end of this month, November. So make sure that you are signed up for our newsletter, which you can go to garagegymathlete.com and you can click on the link that says The Garage. And when you click on that, you will have an opportunity to sign up for our newsletter. We've actually made that pretty difficult for you in the past. We're trying to make it easier. So go get on the newsletter if you're at all interested. We do some pretty big deals on Garage Gym Athlete memberships, all of the programming that we have, programming coursework, coaching coursework, all sorts of stuff. So make sure you go to garagegymathlete.com, click on The Garage, sign up for the newsletter, and you're not going to get spammed. All you get is a once a week email on Fridays called The Garage that updates you on our programming, what's going on around the community content we publish that week. And then you'll also get notified about when Better Human Friday kicks off here at the end of November. But let's get into the study. So this one is really cool. The name of the study is Individualized Endurance Training Based on Recovery and Training Status in Recreational Runners. So I can get into the details of this, but I want to talk a big picture overview real quick. I really like this study. If I've talked a lot about HRV over the years, sometimes in a positive way, sometimes in a negative. And I've been leaning way more towards HRV is not that helpful for our population. And that's kind of been my statement for a while. So when I saw this study, I was like, great, we're doing an HRV study on recreational runners. So a more athlete-based population, similar to what Garage Gym Athlete would be, not elite athletes, and also not grossly untrained human beings who see massive results with anything. So this one was great. I was really glad it came out. And I was curious if it ultimately changed my mind on HRV training, and we can get into that. But what it looked at was, and I'm going to summarize in my own my own words. So there were 28 recreationally trained endurance runners. There were both men and women. And they went through a 15-week training program, and they were split into two different groups. One was a fixed training group, and one was the flexible training group is what they're calling it. So fixed training group was the group where they just went through a fixed training program. There was kind of like any other, like how humans do training, right? Like that's all it was. Like you're in a 15-week training program. You just do what it says for 15 weeks. Now the flexible one is the one that was taking into account heart rate variability. But what I thought was really cool is truly three variables that they were taking into account. One was a subjective recovery score from the previous day. So a more, how are you feeling? and you base it off of like an average. And in any high level training programs I've seen, there's always a subjective score. And that doesn't really get factored into things like your Apple Watch or Whoop or Garmin, whatever you're tracking data on. They don't really care how you think you feel. They're really just going off of whatever their data is saying. So I thought that that was really cool. The second metric of the 3 metrics was nocturnal HRV. So a lot of how your HRV is monitored on most any wearable you have, like Whoop takes it during the night. I think I know Garmin does. Pretty sure Apple does as now. I've never actually used their sleep feature. Do they report HRV in your sleep on the Apple
Yeah.
Watch? They do.
I don't know how accurate it is, but at least they take it the same time if you're using it correctly.
Yeah. In my experience, Apple has one of the most accurate wrist-based sensors of any of them. So if I would say that Apple, if they're doing that now, because they weren't when I was wearing it, I didn't have it when they had any of the sleep features and stuff. There was a way to pull HRV, but I think you had to do the breathing app.
You had to buy another app.
Yeah. So anyway, they were doing nocturnal HRV, which is good because it's just like a consistent place for you to take it. And then the last variable on the flexible training group they were measuring was heart rate running speed index. So this is what Garmin actually uses. If you've ever used a Garmin and you go out for a run. So if I take off for a 5-mile run, it'll tell me within my first mile what my performance is that day. And what they're doing is they're looking at your average speed and your average heart rate for your runs in comparison to your normal. So if I am running at a 6:30 pace and my heart rate's like 181, but normally I'm at a 6:30 pace and my heart rate is like 151, they're going to say my performance is way off. Like for some reason, my heart rate is super jacked up. Or it could be the other way around. It could be I'm running a slower pace, like I'm running a 10-minute mile pace, but my heart rate is way too high, or it's super low. And so that's another great index. So I actually really like the variables they're looking at. And that's kind of one, I'm going to jump to kind of one of my takeaways when we're looking at this. If you want to do HRV based training, look at how many things they took into account that weren't HRV only. You know, they're looking at how do you actually feel? Let's take that into account. And, you know, how is your actual performance when you're out there running today? And the last thing on that, they went through this 15-week training program. I don't need to get into the details of the training program. It was just basically progressive overload for running. So block 1, they had like a preloading group. They got a little bit harder the next 6 weeks, a little bit harder the last 6 weeks. But how they would back things down, and I don't know if I wrote it in my notes, but I just remember from reading it, if you had, so of the 3 things in the flexible training group, if you had one variable off, they would back the training down like X amount. And then if you had 2 variables off, they would back it down even further than 3. I think you just like take the day off or something. So that's how they were looking at the flexible training group. So just have that in your minds as we kind of go through this. Is the fixed training group, they just did a program, boom, 15 weeks. That was it. Record the results. And then HRV or flexible training group, because it was more than HRV, if they looked at the 3 variables they were looking at and things were off, they would back down the training. They would change the training up, change the intensity, change the duration. They would change some sort of metric. And then we can get into the results. But I do want to, you know, hop into what you thought about the study, anything you pulled out that you found interesting overall.
Yeah, this is something that I would have been like, yeah, I'll totally do this. Like, I loved that they ran outside. Because at first I saw treadmill and I was like, oh, 10K on a treadmill? Like, that would have been
that's rough.
Awful. Yeah. But they also ran in groups, which I found so interesting because I feel like as a runner, you pace yourself sometimes. And I feel like you'll have a rabbit and then you'll have, you know, the person that follows that. Anyway, so I wonder if they would have made them do it by themselves, if anything would have changed. But
I think there's a lot of mental stuff here, and that's some of the things that I'll tease out as well. But I think there are a lot of mental things that maybe weren't accounted for in this study that they should have at least put notes on that it was a possibility. Yeah.
Yeah. And to hit on what you were talking about, it was actually the 3 metrics. If all 3 were met, then they increase the load.
Right. So they would go the other way too. Yeah.
Right. And then if only 2 were met, it stayed the same. And then if 0 to 1 were met, then it decreased, which I thought was pretty cool too.
Awesome.
And okay, so the fixed group, What I liked about the fixed group, though, because I feel like we've been talking a lot about the flexible group, was their deload. They had a deload, like a program deload in, which I thought was great on weeks 3 and 6. And their volume increased by 10% each week. So it was where they started, and then it kept going unless it was a deload week for them. So it's not like they were just kept going kind of thing. So they did kind of take a deload into consideration, which I liked. And did you find that their heart rate, like their beats per minute, for me, because I'm looking at these things, they said most things were kept at a low to a moderate intensity, is what they said.
Yeah.
But then they gave you actual beats per minute for their heart rates, which was 145 beats per minute to 160. That's like barely zone 4. That's zone 4 for me, I would say. So that's not even, like I feel like these people weren't even tapping into like redlining ever.
Yeah, I didn't get the breakdown of the ages. That could be a factor.
Well, that's true. I didn't think about that.
Yeah, if they're older, they might need a lower heart rate. But if they also have, I mean, they were running kind of fast, and that's why I like it, because it was recreationally trained athletes.
Right.
Because when they would do an interval pace, it said that the average interval pace was about a 6:36. Which sounds fast. Like a lot of people might hear that, but it's not actually fast. 6:36 is fast if you're running the full mile. If we're talking about an interval-based pace, 6:36 is not actually that fast, because if you want a fast person will run a 400 at a 4-minute mile pace, but they might not be able to do 3 more laps at that pace. And I think that makes sense to everybody, but they weren't overly fast either. So it's ultimately really good data for us to look at for garage gym athletes, because they are right in that, like, we're not at the elite athlete stage, but we're not at these 15-minute mile walking jogs that people do,
Yeah, for sure. I don't know. And I was like, that's great. I love that it wasn't kind of just going to the red line kind of thing.
Well, I think overall, between the two of us, I think the takeaway is we liked the programming, I mean, I think that it was good. I don't have a lot of negative things to say about the programming. I agree with you. I like that there was a deload. I really like how they added or took away from the flexible training group. So I really think that the training, which is odd for me to say from a programming standpoint, but I actually liked the programming. They must have had some sort of coach involved in this and not just some scientist trying to.
Had to.
I think this would be good. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. So I guess to go into the overall takeaway, if that's okay.
Yeah.
What they found is that, so their hypothesis is that the flexible group would have been better on all data, on all metrics. And that ended up not happening. What they found is that the flexible group actually performed better from their own 10K performance, meaning, you ran your first 10K, I guess, week 1. And then by the end of the 15 weeks, they had the best improvement from their own scores time, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, they got the most improved trophy and not necessarily first place, which right. At an individual level might be okay if you're just competing with yourself, but
which are athletes, I would say.
Yeah.
But it wasn't like the flexible group outran the fixed group. So that's where for me, I feel like for our garage gym athletes, I'm like, well, I feel like it's kind of pushing me towards the fixed training, because again, we're scheduling deload weeks for you. If you're doing an endurance trained program, Marco's doing a great job of giving you your volume loads, where he's pushing you and then taking you back down a little bit. And so I feel like the flexible training comes in on things like I'm sick, or my kid kept me up 10 times tonight,
Right.
And it's not necessarily HRV. I loved what you said. Like, there was so much more data that they took. It's like, how are you feeling? Are you going to come into this workout and you're just so tired that you can't do anything? Maybe do a yoga session about it, so that's where I feel like the flexible training comes in handy and is best for our athletes.
Yeah. And going back to their hypothesis, if you just look at the study and you know their hypothesis, they thought that the flexible training group was going to be the best. And then their takeaway is kind of misleading because they do exactly what you said. They're like, well, in conclusion, the most improved 10K runtime was in the flexible training group. And it was like they were trying to match, just be right in their hypothesis, which isn't normally what science does. They just kind of state the facts. But I mean, luckily you can read the whole study. And they did have the most improved. So like you're saying, it's relatively, they improved the most in their 10K. So, but they all groups, fixed and flexible, they improved their VO2 max, they improved their 10K run times, they all got faster, they all got fitter. Like all of those things moved in the right direction. The only thing where it was a significant difference was there significant more improvement, but not even faster. The fixed training group was actually faster on average in their run times, but they had the most improvement overall. And so takeaway wise, to me, with that being the only one being a significant difference, you really have to weigh the pros and cons of like doing, because like how good are you at dictating your heart rate running speed index? Are you checking your nocturnal HRV? Will you have a good way to do a subjective recovery score from previous days? Or would you rather just like, turn my brain off? Here's the training. I'm just going to do it. For me, I would just rather do the training instead of all this other stuff. And then the caveat I always give to that is, okay, if we're doing something really serious, we're training for some big thing and you need like marginal improvements, it might be good. But really, I also think HRV is of significance in aerobic based training primarily. I don't think, and this is from my own data, but I mean, I have done some grueling like resistance training programs while tracking HRV, and there was almost no deviation. And I think that it's because you're ripping your muscles apart when you're doing, strength training, and you could be really sore or it could be really hard, but it might not overtax your cardiovascular system. There will be some degree, but not significance. But it's very different when you go run for 40 minutes and your heart rate has to beat at a faster rate continuously, pumping more blood and oxygen throughout your entire body. So yeah, it's going to be a little bit more fatigued and it's going to affect your HRV a little bit more. So that's also something to take into account. I think this is way more valuable on the aerobic side, maybe not as much on the concurrent training side, and then even less on the strength only side. But my takeaways were the mental side of this, because are kind of some things I want to point out. There's a huge pro to the fixed group training. They just had to do the training. Right. I think that if we just go outside of the science base of like who's actually better, I think pushing yourself to do things you don't want to do, as we talk about all the time, is of huge benefit. So why not just follow program? And when you wake up in the morning and you're like, I really don't feel like it, do it anyway, unless there is some sort of massively limiting factor, like you're saying. Like, yeah, make those decisions. If you slept 2 hours last night because of your kid, yeah, let's call it. Let's move the training session. Let's start moving our days around. Or if you threw up within the last 24 hours, maybe we skip a training session. Like those things are okay. But if you just kind of wake up and it's really just you versus you, and you're like, I don't want to. It's like, well, are you being a baby, or is there a reason you shouldn't do the training? So I think pushing yourself to do the training in the fixed group is of huge mental benefit. And now another thing on the flexible training group side, I think this wasn't like a double blind, like whatever, like they had a mental motivator knowing all these metrics were being tracked. And I think that was completely unaccounted for, because I think that these trainers who don't trainees who don't regularly do this level of training, I think that there was some sort of motivation factor there that wouldn't normally be there. Like, oh, I'm doing this like crazy science-backed training where they're tracking my HRV and like doing all this stuff. I think that motivates you a little bit more to train. And I don't think it's accounted for in this literature at all. So overall, I think it's marginal gain to track your HRV and do your training this way. And so I was hoping to change my mind when this study came out, but I actually just landed in the same exact spot of I think that HRV and all these things are really valuable. I've trained a couple of really high level triathletes before, and they were using third-party systems. This was like before Whoop was like big and all this other stuff, where they would submit all this data to these companies, and it would come back and give you essentially a readiness, and it would adjust your programming for you. So those things are really valuable in these like hardcore endurance based worlds. But these people were trying to get like world records and like some really significant stuff that they were after. And so it makes sense to make those adjustments. And this is when they were taking into account like your urine color, and like there were like 15 different metrics. But if you're not at that level, I think it's unnecessary unless it's just fun for you to collect data, because that's my biggest thing on data collection. It's the same with reading books. Like if your behavior doesn't change post reading a book, you didn't learn anything. You didn't learn anything worth implementing, at least. And then the same with data. Like if you have all this data, you're tracking all this data, and you're like, okay, what are we doing differently? Well, I'm not doing anything differently, but I got all this data. I'd be like, why are you tracking all the data? You're just wasting your time. Like if there's no reason to continue to track all these things. So I don't think it's super helpful. I think it's really helpful if you are getting really serious on the aerobic side. Also, if you are a very serious athlete training multiple times per day, I actually am a huge advocate for tracking all this stuff where you don't run yourself into the ground and get burnt out. But most people listening to this are not in that camp. So I would say don't worry about it. Stick with your fixed training. And if you do want to dabble in it, and because you never have, go for it. It's definitely not going to hurt. You'll have about the same improvement levels either way. So yeah, that was ultimately my takeaway. Yeah. Yeah. Fun stuff. I love the HRV conversation. It's a fun one. What's up, guys? Did you know that I wrote a book? Kind of crazy that it's out there and I almost never talk about it. The book is called Killing Comfort. And what you may not know is that I just lowered the price of the book to the lowest allowable level on Amazon. And you might be asking, why would I do such a thing? And the answer is because I want to put my money where my mouth is and prove I am here to help as many people as I possibly can. And I won't have the price of the book stand in the way. It's also on Audible if you want to hear me read it, but I can't actually adjust the price there. It's automatically set by Amazon on that platform. Either way, you can go to Amazon or killingcomfort.com and get the book at its lowest possible price. If you like the book, I'd love a positive review and 5-star rating if you see fit on Amazon. Leaving your review is a great way to help us help more people. All right, back to the show. All right, so let's get into the topic for today. We're talking CrossFit. I actually just thought this would be an interesting conversation, mainly because it's you and I. And, you know, we have known each other for a very long time. I think fitness-wise, our paths did kind of cross at the CrossFit style. Like I'd gotten into CrossFit our senior year.
It was like college.
Yeah, at Texas Tech. And it was, I used it as supplemental training. Like I'd never once ever had CrossFit been like the thing that I was doing, but I always saw it as conditioning, because I always, just with the Air Force and ROTC, I always saw like I would do strength training and then I need to do something for conditioning. I was just trying to make sure I was good on both those fronts, but I kind of hated running at that time. And so I started to use CrossFit as conditioning because it was quick and I really liked it. But yeah, and then we ended up at the same pilot training base in Wichita Falls. And you can tell your side of the story, but I think you picked up CrossFit somewhere around then, or even earlier. I don't remember. So let's talk about why we got into CrossFit and then why we got out of CrossFit, because we both kind of went down that same path as well. So what was your big reason into getting into CrossFit? Why did you go down that route?
Well, I'm going to actually preface it a little bit. I actually tried a workout, and it was in college. And I think, so Nate Neptune was leading y'all's workouts, but I'm pretty sure you were there too, right? Because you were the wing commander at that time or something.
Yeah.
So it's kind of weird because Scott's older than you, but like year-wise, he's younger than you. Anyways, so he had done this workout with you guys. I guess you guys made them do it. And he was like, we're going to do this workout together. So I meet him up at the gym at Tech and we do Murph. That's the very first CrossFit workout that my fiance wants me to do. And I'm like, okay, oh my gosh. And of course, we didn't petition it. Like there was no breaking up of anything. It was like right in a row. And I remember I got to like I did jumping pull-ups, 50 jumping pull-ups, and I was like, I'm done. This is stupid. Like, I'm out of here.
Yeah.
Like, that was it.
It's a common response to Murph volume the first time. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm pretty sure I like did my college elliptical workout after that. I was like, bye, see you later.
Technically Murph was my first true CrossFit workout too. I just didn't know it at the time. And well, I had been run through it basically through ROTC as well. But I didn't know about it. I didn't know it was called Murph, or like I didn't know what it was in memory of anybody. We were just forced to do it outside because there was a mile loop at Tech, and pull-up bars can be your start and finish point. And so it was just like perfect. But yeah, that was my first one as well. So that's cool.
Yeah. And same. I had no idea that it was named Murph. He didn't tell me, like, he was like, this is what it is. I was like, oh, okay, well, I'll give it a go. I got into CrossFit actually. I know it. So again, Scott and you kind of worked out a little bit. Like I remember he would sometimes go to your garage to train, not as much as Greg did, but like every once in a while. And he'd be like, Jerred has a sled now. I'm like, what? What does he have a sled for? Like, what is this? And he's like, yeah, Jerred's doing sled pushes and we're doing box jumps. And he would tell me about y'all's workouts. And I'm like, man, those, they sound fun. But I was doing like stupid classes, like this boot camp stuff where I'm lifting like 5 pounds 1,000 times, and nothing was happening.
Strengthening those ligaments. Yeah.
Oh yeah. But I liked classes because I liked people. Like I liked the aspect. So I think that's where you and I differ a little bit. Like I liked working out with others and having that community. And so CrossFit kind of grasped me there. I also loved the coach that I had. His name is Brent Ragsdale, and he just in general was a phenomenal coach. He really cared about every single person, your form. Again, like this was my first CrossFit experience, so I had no idea about like the whole taboo thing of, some coaches don't give a crap about your form, just get it up and go as heavy as you possibly can. Like, no, he would stop you and be like, those knees are going in, go out, or your back is rounding, do not pull that, whatever it was. So he was really great. And so that's what kind of hooked me in. And then the competitive nature set in. And I liked that there's this guy that looks jacked and I'm crushing him, and like, it's stupid because I'm doing relative weight to my body weight, right? He's not even, he's doing like way more. It was so dumb, but I absolutely loved it. And then that was my first really lifting experience. I mean, I went into the college stupid rooms and did the leg outie, innie thingies, whatever you call them. I don't know, leg extensions, and I hated it. But barbell, like I fell in love with the barbell almost immediately. And I was like, squats with weight on my back? What is this? And then my personality is, as you can say, is once I go in, I go all in. And so I was all into CrossFit, was that annoying Facebook poster posting my PR times. And like, that's all I talked about. And oh man, it was so dumb, but
hey, that's part of the part of how it all started, right? So similar story, like I just said, Murph started me into CrossFit. I did my primary, like I said, the primary reason I liked it was because it was a new form of conditioning I could do in conjunction with strength training that had nothing to do with running most of the time, which was great. And so I liked that. I would say I am competitive, but like you were saying, I never really did CrossFit in a class. I never have once had a membership at a CrossFit gym. So I never actually got to experience that very often. I did enter 1 or 2 CrossFit competitions, but it was always like, who's that guy? It's like, he just came from the bowels of his garage and like nobody else knows who I am. And so that I just liked a new form of conditioning ultimately. Back then too, it was not really catered towards anybody can do it. And at that time I really liked that. a whatever elitist mentality that may force me to have, especially back then. I liked that it was forging elite fitness. That was the main thing. And like, it was harder for people to do. It was kind of scary for people to do. And so I was like, yeah, well, that's what I want to do. If this is the hardest level of fitness, this is what I want to do. And I think that's what made me want to do it back then. And I think I have a natural capacity for being good at grunt work. Like I hate 3-minute Metcons. Like I think most people do, but
Right.
I don't just hate them because they suck. I hate them because it's like, no matter how hard 3 minutes is, I have to do more after that. There's no way
Right.
I'd be like, that was a good day. Crack the knuckles. Let's go home.
Did Fran.
Yeah.
I'm
Like,
good.
I don't care how bad my lungs burned or how bad my legs hurt. We still only did 3 minutes of activity. I need something else to do. And so I really liked longer form chippers and stuff like that. And so I got into it mainly for the conditioning side. I thought it was really cool. So that's kind of why we got into CrossFit. But as everyone knows, we also got out of CrossFit. We're not that interested in it anymore. And to be honest, me personally, don't talk too fondly of it. And in fact, some of the things I just said are the nicest things I've ever said about CrossFit. But why did you get out of CrossFit? Why were you like ultimately kind of like, you know what? I don't know if this is for me.
Yeah. So actually, my second box and the only other box that I ever went to was in Goldsboro, North Carolina. And the people there were great, but unfortunately the coaching was it was not so great. He would pit you against other people. He'd say, "Oh, well, this chick got her muscle up today. How come you can't do it, Hicks?" Stuff like that. And I was like, this is not motivating me.
Yeah.
And I actually did like the kind of this is gonna sound terrible because I've never played football, but kind of that like football, like get in there, you can do it. Like
Yeah.
I like that. I'm not a blow smoke up my butt kind of person. Like get in my face and I will do better. But so that's where it went. And so I kind of went off base, decided I'm gonna follow different programming. I think I did like Bergner's programming, which was intense. Like I was at the gym for 2 hours doing the strength portion and then like the Metcon or whatever. But I slowly but surely noticed that things were stagnating and I was not feeling so great. And so I decided actually right before we moved to England, we had lunch with you and Emily. And I just remember kind of talking to you about it. And you were telling me about, our programming, this and that. And I had known about Garage Gym Athlete because obviously like you had started it. Didn't you start it in Wichita Falls? Kind of, sort of?
Technically, yeah. It just was slow
Yeah.
going. Yeah. That
Yeah.
full-time
So
active duty job kind of got in the way for a while, but
kept you a little busy.
yeah.
No. So I had known that you had done programming. And so I remember just kind of talking to you about it. Like, what do you think? And you're like, well, why don't you just kind of look at the programmings and see? And then it was like one of those Shred promos or something. And I just remember reading it. I was like, this is what I want. I want someone that cares about what I'm doing. And this program looks fantastic because you could kind of see like a day or two. And so I jumped in and did that. And I noticed a huge difference, like not necessarily in PRs, which I ended up having still because I had done CrossFit at this point for years now, like 6 years at that point. So to me, like I wasn't that new beginner person, but here I was seeing so many more improvements. But then I also saw improvement in my sleep and improvement in my quality of life. And I didn't quite realize that I was missing that, I guess.
Yeah.
And so thankfully, it was like, well, this is where I want to be. And so then I just, again, went full Garage Gym Athlete. And then we started diving into the why, like the behind this, like, again, these studies that we were doing. And it started opening my eyes. And then I had Connor. And that also opened my eyes because I realized all the high intensity that I'd done, like even though kids are hormone bombs, let's be for real, that's just what they are. I really think CrossFit was a huge detriment to my hormonal health. And every time I hear a girl that is like, I love it for this reason, I'm like, I know. don't do it. Like, just
Yeah.
don't do it. And I know they're getting smarter. Like, I've heard that they're doing, some strength programs and stuff like that, but they're repeating stuff like Windler, the 5-3-1 program over and over again. And you end up doing these same strength programs every year. And that was the other thing that I was like, I'm kind of bored. Like, I just want to do something different. And yeah, that was why I got out of it. So ultimately, bad coaching, realizing I needed to change. And then, yeah, I found that not doing CrossFit was a better way of life.
Yeah. I mean, I do think that high intensity, that's the biggest issue I have. The real reason I stopped though, because I would say I wasn't as educated on the high intensity stuff being a problem. I even liked high intensity. I still like high intensity. It's just, I think it's something that has to be limited. The
Right.
main reason I slid out of CrossFit was the programming didn't make any damn sense. Like
Mm,
no matter what, no matter who I talked to, I went to the CrossFit level 1, talked to them about programming, learned all the stuff they wanted. I interviewed people for years on the Better Humanology podcast, a lot of them top CrossFitters, and it just didn't make any sense. And it really bothered me. And I think it bothered me because I was coming from at least 10 years of like strength and conditioning,
mhm.
more as an athlete from early high school all the way through college. That was this type of training I was doing. And then I adopted CrossFit as this conditioning modality. And then people were like, no, it doesn't need to be the conditioning modality. It's what you do. That's the only thing you do. I'm like, that also doesn't make sense. And so I couldn't put any frameworks to it. And I think that just actually bothered me. It doesn't necessarily mean that CrossFit is wrong, but this is why I left or stopped doing it. To be honest, shortly after, I wasn't in CrossFit for like very like years and years and years. It was, I don't know what the time frame would be, but maybe a few years where I was really interested. And then I was like, okay, this isn't making sense. And I actually felt like I was sliding backwards in a lot of areas. I had made improvements. I feel like my
Mm,
run times were getting slower. I was getting weaker. But granted, I was really fast and really strong. So like I was kind of at like a pinnacle in those areas, but all those things started to slide back. But I was getting better at CrossFit. And I'm like, but what use is that?
right.
Like what is like I can go with another CrossFitter and be like, I beat you in Fran, but hey, I'm weaker and my mile time's slower. So like it's okay. Like those things started to really bother me. And so that's why I got out. And I was like, it is about the programming. Cause like you said, you got on a more structured program, you see results faster. And that's also one thing. I forgot his name. I interviewed him. He was a top CrossFitter, and he gave me the best explanation of like kind of like the daily over decades approach. He was like, well, you just have to stick with it. Like he's like, CrossFit doesn't work in like a 12-week time period. It works in like, doing it for 2, 3, 4 years. And he had been doing it like 15 years at that point. And I was like, that like that's also like I get it. Like let's be consistent. But if I can get better in 12 weeks or stronger in 12 weeks, why would I not just do that in 12 weeks and then adopt the training around that? So everything that had to
Right.
do with me originally leaving and not being interested was the programming. And then another thing that started to bother me more with CrossFit is, and this happens in every industry, everyone became obsessed with the top people, right? Like the Rich Fronings, the Matt Frasers, like all those
Right.
people. And none of them, in my view, were doing CrossFit. Because if you actually broke down their training, it's so funny. If you talk to Matt Fraser, he was doing inordinate amounts of zone 2. Like he was really like, he didn't tell anybody that, like we've been talking about zone 2 for years as well, but it's like, that was one of his secrets. That's not taught. That was not taught, at least when I was into CrossFit. They didn't even mention heart rate zones. It's like, you do everything hard and fast and you'll get better. Like
Right.
that was the only way you would approach anything. Rich Froning, a ton of very intelligent programming that he wrote himself on top of very periodized strength programming. And so like
Didn't he
nobody
work
was,
with Westside Barbell at one point? Or
yeah,
I
I
know
mean, he
like
went
a lot of them
everywhere.
did.
Yeah,
Right.
like, and because everyone was trying to gather like what the best training modalities were going to be, and that's what made
Mm,
CrossFit exciting back then. But then once it kind of just landed on like they wouldn't budge from this definition of high intensity.
easily
I don't even know
varied.
what the definition is anymore. I like
It's like constantly varied. I don't
high intensity
remember.
done on a daily basis. I don't know what. Anyway, it's just not a constantly varied function movement performed at high intensity.
Look
Yeah,
at
that's
you.
there. Anyway, it's just like, no, like why won't you guys budge on that and just change? Like it's okay to change, and I think they have new leadership that changed. Like Greg Glassman got canceled or whatever, and then they brought in somebody new. And maybe that culture's changing, but I'm just not interested in hopping back in. but the programming was the main thing I got. And then the more we learned, like you said, about high intensity, how it can wreck metabolic systems, and what we learned from the Biggest Loser study, you may never recover, which is the scariest thing like I've ever heard, is like, oh yeah, you can actually beat yourself into submission so hard, your metabolic system may never recover. Those things are scary to me. And I think that it's a huge detriment when you are looking at the top competitors who are not actually doing CrossFit. They're not doing a daily WOD and calling it good. They're doing all these other different training modalities with, how I was looking at it, high intensity metcons being a part of their conditioning. And then everyone else trying to jump in and do these things who have type 2 diabetes or something else, to where they shouldn't be pushing themselves that hard at the start. There should be like an on-ramp, even an intensity, because CrossFit would have on-ramp classes, but all on-ramp was to teach someone who had no business to like doing a snatch. They would teach them how to do a snatch in 3 weeks. Like that was all on-ramp course was. It had nothing to do with their metabolic rate or like tracking any of that stuff. So that was my ultimate problem, and kind of why I backed out pretty fast was programming. And I also joked that if CrossFit gyms were like Globo gyms where you could just pay a membership and go and do your own thing, I would have never started Garage Gym Athlete. Honestly, I probably would not have, because I didn't know what it was going to be, right? I was just like a guy working out in my garage. I could have gone and done anything career-wise. And so if they would have just let me do my own stuff, every time I show up to a CrossFit gym, they'd be like, no, you got to do what we're doing. I'm like, why would I want to do what you're doing? Like, I want to do what I want to do. They would never let me do it. And so I'd be like, well, I'll just do my own thing. So started my own programming, started Garage Gym Athlete, all that kind of stuff. But I think if people would have just let me do my own programming at a CrossFit box, I would just be some random guy like with a desk job in a cubicle somewhere who really enjoys fitness. That's probably where I would end up. So I'm actually really happy that CrossFit structured the way it was, because it pointed me in a different direction. But yeah, that's why I got out of it and why I still don't like it. Programming doesn't make any sense.
I will say one last thing. One of the other things that it highlighted to me too was I think we both got our level 1s. You got your level 1, right?
Yeah, I did.
So that course is over a weekend, and you have this crazy booklet that you look and read and study and whatever. And to be fair, like the test was not that easy to me. I know you've taken the other crazy strength and conditioning test, and I have not done that, and I don't ever feel like I ever want to do that. But what I'm getting at is the nutrition side. Like you have like just a snippet. And I remember they were like, okay, this is how you calculate macros. This is how you put someone in a deficit. This is how you whatever. You got it? Good. That was your nutrition side.
Go wreak havoc on society now.
Seriously. And that's what was happening was these coaches would teach nutrition on the weekends after a Saturday workout. And the Saturday workouts were always, there was no strength involved. It was always like this crazy long 45-minute Metcon, like, here we go. And then they teach this nutrition stuff. And I remember they're like, okay, for your weight, blah, 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 you're going to eat 1,600 calories essentially. And so I went from that to then I remember you and I had our first one-on-one, and you're like, you're going to eat 1,900 calories. And I was like, I'm sorry, what? And you're like, nope, the way that we train, you're going to eat this way. And, this is where I want you to hit. This is your protein goal. Like they didn't even hit on protein. That was like you're like, if you can't hit these, I want you to hit the protein first. Like, okay. And I remember seeing the results and I even lost weight. Like I remember being like, what is this? I'm eating more. I'm, taking that intensity down. Anyways, that whole nutrition thing, that gets me, because I'm like, I feel like it's a huge detriment to so many people and they don't even know it.
Yeah. And I think people, because I hear that a lot, like, oh, I can eat more. And I think if you've never been on a macro plan or whatever, you don't know how many calories you should eat. You should actually calculate that out one time, because the same thing happens to me when I've talked about this on the podcast before. If you just leave me alone and I don't track anything, I will undereat. It's just natural, because I'm really busy after work. I'm busy during work. And so I don't fit in as many calories as I should. And then every time I kind of realize that, if I get into that zone, I go back to like, okay, I'm going to track everything. I'm going to eat what I should. And then the first 2 or 3 days are the only days where I feel like this is a lot of food. Like this feels like I should not be eating this much. But after like whatever my metabolic system regulates, my appetite regulates, 3 days later, I'm eating the same amount of calories. Like let's say it's 3,500 or 3,300. And I'm like, why am I hungry at the end of the day and I should be done? And so it actually, like, I don't want to go into it speeds up your metabolism, like catchphrase. I'm just saying your body adjusts very quickly to a new diet, especially when all of that's clean. A lot of that's protein. You'll change very fast, and it can also change your aesthetics pretty quickly. And so people are always confused by that, but it's just different. You're eating better food, and your body is better to utilizing the food that you are eating if you're training properly. So it's just a lot going on there.
For sure.
Awesome. So that's CrossFit for us. We were into it once. We're not anymore. Maybe you guys have similar stories, but we're never going back. That's all that really matters. All right. So let's get into the workout. I'll brief this one because it's pretty complicated, like I said at the beginning of the show. So we'll probably have to talk about it for a while. It's a 60-minute run. So I think instead of briefing it, I mean, you just run for 60 minutes. And I didn't even pull it up because I didn't feel like I needed to. But I'm pretty certain you have to run. There's no, you're not doing something else. Okay, yeah. Because the reason I did this is because back in like 2017, I believe it was, I had a friend who was coming over to work out with me almost every day. We were doing garage gym athlete workouts together, and he was great. He was very in shape. He was doing all the same workouts that I was doing. And then one day I was like, kind of like, let's go off the programming. I was like, let's just go do an hour run. And he was like, I don't know about that. And I was like, come on, man. He's like, I've never run for an hour before. I was like, you've never run for an hour before? Because up to this point, I had done very long runs. Like, I honestly think I ran.
You'd done the marathon by then. Yeah.
Yeah. Like I had run marathons. I think I had run marathons on accident in ROTC. Like, not like
you
all
did
at
it
once.
On a track.
Yeah. Like so I just done a lot of running for very long periods of time. And so when he's like, I don't think I've ever run for an hour before, that blew my mind because he was strong. He was fit. Right. Like he had everything else going for him. And I was like, well, let's do it. And I was like, let's break a PR. Like, who cares about how fast we go? Let's break a PR for you, just like time-wise running. And it wrecked him mentally. Like, he kept stopping. Like, we were good for like most of it, which was funny. It was like up to like 45 minutes, he was fine. And we were at a good pace. For some reason, though, his brain broke at like minute 45. Like, he was, he wanted to take a bunch of rest. I was like, no, come on, let's go. Let's just keep moving. And so that's what spurred this entire thing being a Meet Yourself Saturday, because a lot of you listening to this, I mean, unless you've been an athlete for a while, you probably have never done a 60-minute run unless you, for some reason, have done something competitive before. And so when we say 60 minutes, it is 60-minute continuous run. There shouldn't be any stopping or breaking this up or walking. You should just find a pace. And I come from the military where like we're moving, like it looks like we're running, but it's a 16-minute mile pace. Like, I don't care what it
shuffle those feet.
Yes, do a shuffle, but never get to the walk. You can go as slow as you want, but never get to the actual walk, because that is like, to me, that's where the mental weakness set in. Because if I say you can go as slow as you want, you can shuffle, but you still end up walking, that's just a mental breakdown. There's nothing to do with anything else. And it hurts. Like, it hurts to do a 60-minute run if you've never done it before. Like, it'll hurt your hip flexors and everything else if you've never run that for that distance. So that's the big story behind it and kind of the mental piece to it. What do you have on tips for completing your first 60-minute run if you've never done it before?
Don't go too hot out the gate. That's what I did. That always happens.
Yeah.
Yeah. Start out slowly, kind of, work your way into it. But yeah, I will say this one is definitely way more mental than what you think it's going to be too. Because I considered myself a good runner and I love to run. I've never not liked running. I don't know if it's the soccer player in me. I have no idea. But yeah, that I would say about, and it's funny, you said 40 to 45 minutes. That's where mine happened. At 40 minutes, I was like, I'm done with this. I don't want to run for an extra 20 minutes. But I kind of had to, because I was out on an Air Force base by the flight line and I had to get back to my car. So I had to turn right around. So that's another good way. Maybe run out somewhere and have to come back or something.
It's the best way.
Yeah.
You just have to plan. If you're not at a consistent pace,
right,
this will turn into a 70-minute run. So you set all sorts of PRs.
For sure. So I feel like maybe that is a good way to make yourself do this, because yeah, you might want to stop.
Yeah. I don't know if I have any additional tips. I think if you are one of our athletes who's done it, either you've done 60-minute runs or you do the 50-minute zone 2, runs that we have in deload weeks, then this isn't that much of a stretch for you. So I would say in that case, push yourself a little bit here and maybe go heart rate based. So race pace is typically considered zone 3 pace. In training, it's like the forgotten zone because like zone 2 helps build the aerobic base. Zone 4 and 5 helps build like aerobic threshold. And so we use those a lot in training, but we stay away from zone 3 because there's not as much benefit or application, but that's supposed to be your race pace. And so maybe try 60 minutes in zone 3. And then if you want to hit zone 4, last 5-10 minutes or something like that, go for it if you really want to push yourself. But I'd say if you've done it before, go for more of a performance angle. If you haven't, just go for a completion angle. Just get it done without having to take a single step in a walking capacity and finish your 60 minutes out. But it's a good one. And I think our bodies can handle that. I've seen that a lot in a lot of different people. Like for some reason, 45 minutes. It's like we can handle that, but then it's like, and you really get in your head there too, because part of you is like, it's only 15 more minutes. Well, 15 more minutes of watching a TV show is not that bad. But when you look at 15 minutes or 20 minutes, you're like, oh, that's 2 more miles, and that will jack with your brain. You know, if you're, as opposed to just, it's just 15 more minutes, you start to have all these other conversations. It's like, no, it's 2 more miles and miles are long, like whatever is going on in your brain. And that's where you want to get. So you might not meet yourself till the end, but embrace it when it's there. Be thankful that you have now met yourself. You have that opportunity to change the conversation, and go for it. But this is a great one. We get a lot of complaints when it's programmed because it seems like it's like a lazy meet yourself Saturday, but in all honesty, it's one of the best for building mental toughness.
Agreed.
All right. I think we can wrap it up from here. We'll save updates for next time. But Ashley, I do appreciate you talking CrossFit history with us today. That was fun. We haven't talked about that in a long time. But for anyone who, listening to this and you made it this far in the podcast episode, if you're not a part of our training, not a part of the community, go to garagegymathlete.com and you can sign up for a 14-day free trial. Whether you are a part of the community or not a part of the community, make sure you're signed up for the newsletter because like I said, we have Better Human Friday coming up at the end of November. We're going to be doing a lot of deals. If you want to snag some of our training, we only ever do these promotions once per year. So you can get a lot of our training, keep it forever, even get some great deals on a Garage Gym Athlete membership. So you can wait for that as well if you have never signed up for us to train. But that's it for all of our people in the community. Thank you so much. And remember, if you don't kill comfort, comfort will kill you. To the Garage Gym Athlete podcast. If you want to learn more, go to garagegymathlete.com. You can learn about our training. Let us send you a copy of our book, The Garage Gym Athlete, or you can even get featured on the Garage Gym Athlete podcast. Thanks for listening.